Hi everyone, Roy Rogers here from the White Book and Second Sons, back with another one of the How and the Why videos. This one has been a little bit in the brewing. I think I promised this like over the course of like the last year. But in honor of the fact that FFG is really heavily pushing the Baratheon box this week, they just spoiled a bunch of really cool cards that I suggest checking out. Including a fancy new agenda that I'm sure we'll be talking about in upcoming episodes of the White Book and the Second Sons that looks like it has a chance to shake up the game. Uh, and they're going to be live streaming it a couple of days after this video comes out. So with the Bear Box around the corner, I thought we would take a look at where Baratheon is right now as a faction and look at what I think is the most successful Baratheon deck, right? And talk a little bit about how it plays, what its strengths are, what some of its weaknesses are, and maybe because one of the things that's really fascinating about the Game of Thrones community is despite Baratheon being, I think, clearly the worst faction and clearly the worst faction for a long time, it has a lot of loyalists and a lot of people who are hashtag making it work. So let's jump right into it, and we'll start with sort of where House Baratheon is right now in the meta. So, spoiler alert, Baratheon is probably the weakest faction. For those of you who have been playing since the beginning of the dark days of early 2.0, Baratheon was very powerful right out of the core set. Its core themes generally are kneel, which means that, of course, playing characters and events that cause your opponent to have to kneel or tap one of their characters, or more recently locations as well, which proved to be really powerful. The core set meta was dominated, of course, by big guy mid-range tempo decks and to a lesser extent aggro decks. All of which, and then once Lord of the Crossing came out early in the first cycle, rush decks as well. So maybe up to probably the first year and a half of the game, Baratheon was powerful because of just its ability to have spot character control. In the form, of course, Qohor Melisandre and her synergy with R'hllor cards. Of course, Core Mel allows you, whenever a R'hllor card is martial or played, which means generally speaking, in the marshaling phase, or if you play an event in the challenges phase, you can choose and kneel a single character. And there's a variety of supporting R'hllor cast that has come out both in the core set and subsequently that sort of powered up her theme. And then, of course, Bara combines that with a passive power theme centered around the Chamber of the Painted Table, which is a location that after you win dominance, you can steal a power from your opponent alongside the power you get for dominance, which led to, of course, table and chair decks, which with the chair, of course, being the core set Iron Throne, which gives 2 additional reserve and gives, I believe, 8 strength for dominance. So the combination of the ability of spot character control and this sort of passive power sense of inevitability win condition made Bara very powerful for about the first year and a half. But Bara was always steadily on the decline, and a lot of that has to do with its early out of the box power. It was clear early on that Bara fealty in particular was really powerful, really strong. Kneel tends to be not the most popular thing to happen to your board, particularly early on when Bara was when the game was just getting started and Thrones centered very much around the mid-range out of the tin approach of sort of you play a big guy, I play a big guy, and we punch each other in challenges kind of thing. And then supplementing that with whatever faction tricks or whatever banner faction tricks you have. Kneel, of course, is the least fun thing. You know, I spent 7 gold on my Tywin and 6 gold on my Jaime and 5 gold on my Tyrion, and you just knelt them and they don't do anything, and you just punch me in the face with Robert or stole a power from me every turn +1 dominance. This isn't fun. So it's clear that FFG was really cautious about printing both passive power cards for Baratheon and printing kneel cards. So they didn't gain any sort of redundancy on Melisandre's effect until very recently with Selyse and Selyse Baratheon, who of course kneels your faction card and kneels all non-lady characters in play when she enters. That's sort of the most powerful kneel effect, and there's been some locations as well that have come out recently to sort of make a kneel stronger. But for a long time there was no kneel. FFG chose instead of to develop kneel or really their passive power theme to develop their a power like kind of like a power rush theme that exists very much as sort of a secondary theme, maybe in the core set, but the FFG designers have chosen to sort of bring to the forefront, uh, sort of from the first cycle to say relatively recently, sort of like a power rush thing. And of course, no card I think really epitomizes that more than Fickle Bannerman, which is a bestow card from the third cycle that if you has renown, it's very cheap, 3 cost, high strength, 6 strength, I believe, Bicon, military, and power icons. And if you lose a power challenge, you get your opponent, unless you either sacrifice a gold that you bestowed on it, or you have to give control of it to your opponent. So it just sort of plays into like I'm going to power rush you and make it so that I can't lose power challenges. Red keep a core set card that plays into that theme, and some other things play into it. So, but that theme just never really reached a critical mass to be really powerful. So the best Bara theme out of the core set, Neil, didn't really get a lot of support for the first 5 or so chapter packs. The best theme for um, the second best theme, the passive power theme, didn't get a lot of support, and this third theme of power claim just never quite got there. That puts Bara sort of in a bad spot. Very similar to Lannister. I believe that Danny, who's now the lead designer of Danny Schaefer, who's now the lead designer, came on his last interview we did with him on the White Book and talked about Lannister also suffering from a similar problem. It was very strong coming out. Cards like second cycle's Lannister Harrenhal that allowed you to cheat characters into play for free meant that sort of the design space of Lannister got limited by the early strength of it, and so that meant design had to pull back on the characters. And I think Baratheon suffered from a similar problem of just sort of coming out of the gate really strong, and FFG trying to pump the brakes, and they pumped the brakes too hard. Similar to Lannister, Bara's other major problem is econ. It's consistently gotten some of the worst econ cards. Its 2-drop gold producing location requires you to have 1 dominance to stand up, which if you go all in on the dominance strategy can be very powerful, but it provides a really clear build around in a way that many of the successful or not build around, a lot of successful counterplay from your opponent. Because already, if you're trying to beat a Bara deck, trying to come up with a way to win dominance, either by blowing up their throne, leaving characters standing, that's kind of the play pattern you have to do to beat a lot of Bara decks, so that are trying to rely on this dominance theme. So there's lots of clear counterplay to your opponent's economy, and it's not even like it only produces 1 gold if you haven't won dominance or something. It just simply doesn't stand. So that just is a hot mess for Baratheon. So it sees very little play. And then its non-limited econ that it received the previous cycle, not the one that's currently undergoing, while is fine, it doesn't really provide sort of like a oomph, the way in which the Stark deck does, the way in which the Lannister one, the way in which the Tyrell, the Greyjoy, there's like clear, really good synergies for what Baratheon is trying to do in its economy cards, or excuse me, in those economy cards, and not in Baratheon. So Baratheon lost again. I mean, it's fine, and when we get to the deck that I want to talk about, you'll see that Stormlight Fiefdom is in the deck, but it's definitely weaker. And then, of course, Bara got a perfectly acceptable Rivergate, but also it's also on the weaker end of its gate as well, of the gate econ cards. So Bara is far behind the other factions in economy, and its themes are underdeveloped. And this really puts Bara at a disadvantage when all the other factions except Lannister have received significant amount of power creep. And Lannister's dominance of the meta lasted for about 2 years, from sort of its early success right out of the core set to Joe Mirando's win at the first Worlds, to being highly competitive up to last year's Worlds with the both Lanny Crossing and Lanny combo being powerful. Not last year's Worlds, excuse me, Worlds, the one that Reinhardt won, excuse me. So that'd be Worlds 2017. being a powerful force in the meta, up to really Gen Con of last summer, where it was sort of the last hurrah of Atlantic Crossing, which won KubaCon last year. It did pretty well over that summer and kind of flailed out a little bit at Gen Con that year and just sort of lost its popularity and has proven, while to be a very solid choice in a war format meta, Atlantic Crossing really just hasn't gone anywhere, hasn't gotten a lot of new tools. So Lannister, is still been a meta presence, at least until relatively recently, in the general joust meta, where Baratheon hasn't. Like occasionally you'll see a Baratheon, and we'll get to this successful Baratheon deck, but it's never really been a player the way in which Lannister was a player. And the other factions, Tyrell, Night's Watch Martell, which came out of the core set Stark, which came out of the core set pretty weak. I mean, Martell is arguable with Sam's win in just the core set meta, but I do think Martell was pretty weak coming out initially. Just the power creep is real in those factions, and Baratheon hasn't been able to keep pace with them. And of course, Targaryen started strong and has just stayed strong throughout its history. Same with Greyjoy, which has sort of also been pretty strong starting off and has sort of waxed and waned, but maintained a consistent presence in the meta. So really, Baratheon is kind of the lone house, the Stags, which of course make up my static image here, is just very weak overall. But what does Bara have going for it? Bara does have some really powerful loyal cards, and we'll get to that when we talk about it. So, all right, you just listened to me talk about how bad of a spot Baratheon is in. It's getting a box, which hopefully, I mean, if you look at the spoil cards, which again, I'll link those cards in the description to this video, so you can take a look. Bara's getting some interesting new tools that are developing those three themes, I think, pretty strongly. I mean, there's a bunch of new cool lore cards coming out. Looks like the passive power grab is getting a little bit of support. Same with the power rush, and of course Neil is getting a little bit of support as well with that new Robert, who's super cool. So check out those spoilers if you want to see. But that doesn't mean much because I think the current article said Q3 we're going to be getting the Bara box. So it's going to be a little bit of time before we see these new Bara cards. So you are going to sit down, and regional season is right around the corner, and you are just such a diehard. Your heart is still broken, but hashtag spoilers. The defeat of the One True King Stannis in the show is still heartbreaking you. You're desperately just waiting for Winds of Winter to read about the Battle of Ice and see what happens to Stannis, and you just really want to play some yellow cards. Well, what deck should you play? Well, probably the most successful and consistent Baratheon deck right now is Bara Rose Qohor, which was innovated by probably one of the best deck builders and players in the world, and a big innovator. What separates Hano from other really successful deck builders is he's also an innovator, and he publishes. So, which is one of the reasons why we're able to talk about this list, which I will bring up right now. Yep, there we go. This is Hano's, the most recently published one. So this is the list he took to Stolic, which, as you can see, is still legal with the Joust restricted list, even though it came out in November. And Baratheon hasn't really gotten that many new cards. And I'll talk about sort of cards you might want to slide in here and find room for if you literally don't want to just play this 75 for 75. So what this deck does is it tries to play to some of the strengths of Baratheon while bringing in cards from Tyrell that supplement the theme, both of Knights, which is a sort of a tertiary theme in Baratheon, and those 1.0 players remember how good Bara Knights was, but has not really been fully developed. But what this deck's core strategy is this. It brings in Tyrell cards that support that sort of third core theme of Baratheon, which is the power grab, power rush theme. And that's, of course, why you have Banner Rose. This lets you bring in cards like Standy Randy, Honey Wine, that can sort of supplement what you want to do for Power Rush. High Guiding Courtier, which gives you multiple uses out of characters, and then you're playing Qohor, and why it's an alliance deck and not just a Bara Rose deck, to give you some control elements, to give you some ways of counterplay. Because while Neil is great, FFG's printed a lot of stand recently. Not in Stark, in Targaryen, and in other factions as well, including Tyrell. Again, let's go back to Highgarden and Courtier. So a lot of factions have access to stand or some ways of getting around, or the form of like Greyjoy, they have access to Vince to cancel your Melisandre triggers. So the control that Bara naturally has to its faction is just pretty neutralized. I mean, that's not saying that Neil is completely useless. It's just not as strong. So in order to maintain some kind of tempo and keep up with this, it wants Qohor. And because Qohor gives you the ability to use these attachments in a variety of different ways. So you can use Milk of the Poppy to control a key faction, a key character on demand, right? Because the one thing that this deck can do is it can definitely win challenges. It's running a huge big guys that can push through. You don't have to win by 5 with Qohor, right? It's just after you win a challenge, you can sacrifice an attachment to get another attachment of your choice of equal or lesser printed cost. So this just gives you the ability to turn things like Knighted or Little Birds into milks when necessary, or bodyguards or things like that. So that's really powerful. And the fact that it has access to these tempo plays and access to a little bit of control on demand gives it an oomph over its competition and gives an additional level of consistency. And again, it is for a deck like this that is dedicated to getting those cohort triggers off and isn't like necessarily like a combo newest Jon Snow, I guess you would say, cycle Jon Snow. I don't know if Lord Commander Jon Snow deck that spread its threats out and isn't a combo deck. It's really hard to prevent this deck from getting that cohort trigger, and you've got a ton of tempo tools available to you. You can definitely put in a Seize by the Guard, which Hano explains here in his original version of it. He had a Seize by the Guard, which he turned into some other tools, which you can look at his published list for why he made those changes for Stalock this past year. Because the great thing about the Qohor agenda is that you can customize this save. I think 16 attachments is probably about the right place to be. You can go up a little bit, go down a little, but like somewhere around 12 to 18 attachments is probably where you want to be. And you can customize this package to basically what you expect from your meta. So if you expect a lot of people to be playing builders, you want to put your seized in. If you expect a lot of people to be playing Greyjoy, you want to make sure that you have that full suite of milks. If you are expecting a lot of Targaryen, you're going to want to put in some more positive attachments, like something like the Tyrell Crown or something like that could come in here. There's a variety of different tools that you could do that will help bring that will help get you this tempo that you need. So, what's this deck's game plan point by point? So it's to leverage the knights for either a rush game plan, about a turn 3 rush, I think is what this is, probably about 2 or 3 rush. So we're going to want to leverage powerful characters like, of course, the king himself, Robert Baratheon, and then Bastard of Night Song, who is really, really strong in this deck. Sir Davos Seaworth will come. Sir Courtney Penrose, also really strong. There's a lot of, and then of course you brought in a couple of huge threats. You've got Sir Garland Tyrell from Tyrell. You've got Randall Tarley from Tyrell that you brought in as part of the banner package to sort of give you some additional oomph. And these characters are really good at winning challenges. And of course, we've got Sir Courtney gets additional use after you win a power challenge with him. Bastard Nightsong gains you additional power. Robert provides you with point and click control in the form of Intimidate. And then you've brought in these Highgarden and of course Standy Randy stands himself whenever his strength is, so multiple uses out of him. And then you've got Highgarden Courtier here to provide additional use of all these characters because you have a bunch of strength pumps in the form of Knighted here, Oathkeeper, and Tourney Lance. All of these, which you can, of course, win a challenge with Robert, kneel somebody, trigger claim, put a power on, put an attachment on him, trigger the courtier, or just as soon as he kneels someone with Intimidate, you can trigger the courtier. There's like a variety of plays, or you can put it on your Bastard of Nightsong, you can put it on whatever, and fetch up on demand. So you can get the strength pumps on demand. You've also got the Arbor Queen that provides you with additional strength pumps. So you can do things like pump up your Robert a ton, pump up your Randall, pump up your Bastard of Nightsong, pump up your Randall or your Garland, and then use a Highgarden Courtier. There's like a lot of play. There's tons of strength pumps. This also gives you additional protection against Targaryen. You've got Jousting Pavilion here, which makes your knights get that additional +1 strength whether they're attacking and defending, so you can immediately stand them. So that means Highgarden Courtier is just really powerful in this faction or in this deck. It really, really has the tools to leverage her in a way that very few decks at the current moment don't, and like just a ton of strength pumps. So the other thing about the Knight package is you also want to bust open this card, Green Apple Knight. So Green Apple Knight gets +1 strength for each other Knight character you control, and while you control 2 or more other Knight characters, Green Apple Knight does not kneel when declared as an attacker. 1 or 2 of these could just take over a game. Yes, he doesn't have a power icon, and that's a huge drawback on this deck because it's focused very much on the power challenge. But otherwise, this can just take over. It lets you do 2 attacking challenges at a huge strength. With, let's see, you've got 3 Green Apple Knights, 3 Hedge Knights, 3 Sir Courtney Penrose, 2 Sir Davos Seaworths, 1 Garland, 1 Sir Josué, 3 Justin Massey's. Oh, here's another stand. I missed Sir Justin earlier. Excuse me. Sir Mark Mullendore, Bastard of Nightsong, Vanguard Lancer. There's a ton of knights. Most of this deck, and of course you're running Knighted, which you can fetch on demand. Turning Robert into a knight not only gives him the +1 strength and the ability and access to Jousting Pavilion strength pumps, but also pumps up your Green Apple Knight. So you're just unlocking all these knight synergies in a way that is really powerful. Again, so you're getting 2 attacks and 1 defense out of a single Green Apple Knight. And a Green Apple Knight with 3 other knight characters, and of course Green Apple Knights, if you have 2 of them in play, they count each other. So you just need 1 other knight there. Can just really take over a game. Trust me. I was knocked out of Worlds by one of my put me in to knock myself out of Worlds playing against one of these decks, and Green Apple Knight was important to my loss. It's an extremely powerful card, and I think right now in the current meta, this is the deck that leverages it the best. I think it's much better than running Adamano Tyrell right now. So that's the Knight package. In many ways, it's very similar to Builders in that way, because I think one of the things that's really cool about this deck is it really is a tight synergy deck that all the pieces are interrelated and really necessary to make the deck work as an engine, and it's really powerful. So the other thing to take a look at here is this deck is also really good at recovering. So why is it so good at recovering, Roy? It's good at recovering because it has threat redundancy, right? Another problem that I didn't talk about earlier is Bara doesn't have a lot of threats. It has, of course, the big boy Bobby B himself, Sir Robert Baratheon, who can, of course, run away with games. It has been running away with games since the core set. It has the various Stannises, who are powerful, but that's basically it for in-house threats. What this deck does is it tries to deliver, like, one of the more interesting things that FFG has been doing for Bara recently is it's been printing a lot of these mid-rangey characters. Sir Courtney Penrose, a 4-drop that has a huge upside. Core set, there's Sir Davos Seaworth, who's practically invincible. There's Sir Justin Massey, a 5-drop with a serious upside. Bastard of Night Song, a 5-drop with a serious upside. And then of course you've brought in Randall Tarley and John Fossaway, Mark Mullendore. There's a redundancy of threats. So even if you get Valord, you're not only running dupes on your you've got dupes for 1, 2, 3, at least 2 dupes for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of your main characters. But you also, like, if Robert gets dealt with, you have Randall, you have Sir Justin Massey, you have Bastard of Night Song that can just take over games as well. And you kind of have your own build your own Bob in the attachment and location package, right? Tourney Lance gives a big strength and prevents your opponent from attack, declaring more than one defender, which of course with all the stand means that you can just sort of get 2 or 3 unopposed or single opposed easy wins. You've got Oathkeeper as both a tutor and a strength pump, Sandy Barnabas's favorite card. You've got Knighted that gives +1 strength. You've got Arbor Queen, which is pumping up strength. You've got Joust Pavilion. So you have your build your own Bob that the deck has on demand in the form of the attachments and just has these locations that can also really let these sort of secondary threats take over the game. And of course, power up Robert and Randall, the 2 biggest threats in the deck. Anyway, so if your 2 win conditions are knocked out of the game, you're not out. And that's really a problem that Bara had before. Bara basically, like, if you dealt with Robert and didn't lose to their dominance package or had a game plan around the dominance package, it was really hard for a Bara deck to beat you. What Bara Rose Qohor does is it provides you with redundancy and the ability to tutor out and build your own Bobs. The other thing that this deck does that's really important is it leverages King at the Wall. King at the Wall, which of course you can fetch with any of the other attachments here, is just a 1-cost attachment that is unique. It goes on Bara characters only. Attached character gains the King trait, which allows you to, of course, leverage King in the North. We'll get to the plots in a minute. King at the Wall, it lets you leverage that and King in the North, and then reaction. After you win a power challenge in which the attached character is participating, draw 1 card for each out-of-faction location you control. And you currently control 1. So that's 1 because that's unique. 4, 7, 8 out-of-faction locations. So you could draw generally 2 or 3 cards. Like if you've ever been the victim of some Bara Rose Qohor player who gets the King of the Wall engine going, it's really, really, really powerful. This is an extremely powerful draw card. That this deck is probably the only Bara deck that can really leverage this card successfully and consistently because of the tutor ability of Qohor. But also you've got Isle of Ravens, so you can sacrifice your Knighted and shuffle it in. If something bad happens to your King at the Wall, you can shuffle it in and then fetch it off of a little bird. And the fact that, of course, you're leveraging King in the North, but you're also leveraging Sir Justin Massey for additional stand, or additional renown, rather, excuse me. And, turning Sir Justin Massey into the King at the Wall is cute, and there's other things like that. So it, again, gives you an additional form of card advantage. So you already have a tempo/control element from Qohor, but Qohor also gives you access to this card advantage engine, which of course unlocks powerful tempo plays and like King in the North, and like Sir Justin Massey's stand ability gets unlocked. So and of course Stormlands Thiefdom provides you with some additional stuff. So bottom line, what the draw deck of this deck is doing is it's trying to leverage Knights and Strength Pumps and Qohor's tutor effects to create either rush, again about a turn 3 win, or win a long, grindy mid-range game using the tools of the attachments to outlast your opponent's threats, overpower them, and survive multiple resets. Again, tons of saves. You've got Core Davos here with his stealth, which is really useful, and he's immune to most resets. So the deck is just really, really, really powerful in that case. So what is its its plot deck looking like. So it has tourney for the king, which of course gives you a closer, and makes your opponent immune to your characters immune to events. Knights characters, and of course most of your important characters are going to be knights, particularly when you play this. So and it of course gives renown. It has counterplay against things like oh my god, fortified position because it and things like that, and just is very powerful. It's got barring at the gates, or barring the gates, excuse me, to because it has no come into play abilities for characters. Bara has really poor targets for flea bottom, more or less, so it's never really been a faction that can leverage free bottom. Another reason why Bara has traditionally been weak. Um, and so this can shut down things like Vince's. It can shut down Flea Bottom. It can shut down Skagos. It can shut down Air Plays. It's just a very powerful card right now in the meta. And this deck, and it has 5 gold, and okay initiative. And the deck and 5 reserve. This deck is not usually just swimming in cards. So this is a very safe, useful answer plot for it to be playing. It's got Peace and Prosperity, which is basically its opener. It can sometimes open Barring the Gates against factions like Stark or some Tyrell deck or Lannister deck that wants to open air. But Peace and Prosperity generally its opener. This is the general opener in most Qohor decks or Alliance Qohor decks because its ability to let you get that attachment out. It's solid initiative against other openers, allows you, if you don't have an attachment out, to go first so you don't give your opponent a gold. And of course, this deck plays from first very well with, of course, with the Intimidate from Robert, with the Stealth from Sir Davos, and the Stand from a variety of different characters. So Peace and Prosperity is generally a safe opener. It lets you it basically lets you get the engine rolling, even though it has only 2 economy. Reducing the first character you play by 3. The first location you marshal, I believe that lets you play any location currently in the deck. So very, 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 very strong. King in the North, again, you have a native king in the form of Robert Baratheon, and of course you have King at the Wall, which you can fetch, and Qohor is not turned off by King in the North, so you can do something like go into the challenge phase without a king, win a challenge, trigger, get King at the Wall, and turn yourself on for the whole rest of the round. So very powerful in this. You've got the tools to leverage this. And then now trade routes. So Bara is in such a bad place that it doesn't really have a restricted card, which gives it access to trade routes. That has a benefit because the deck, of course, again, King at the Wall this can't be a PD deck because King at the Wall a political disaster deck because King at the Wall demands that you play out of faction locations. And so since you're building around King at the Wall, that unlocks trade routes as a really good restricted card. That's great. Trade routes is a really powerful card. But one of the advantages of it being restricted right now and having less access to it, and the fact that other factions have better economy than Bara, other factions can run more utility plots, can run more useful plots. Trade routes is amazing as a gold producer, but it's not really in a meta that is very much about mid-range battles and about answering the overpowered threats that your opponents are generally playing out of Greyjoy, out of Stark, out of Targaryen. Like, plots are really important to win those games currently. Partially that is because trade routes is restricted. And also because, of course, Bara's options are poor with threats. Robert is probably still its best threat. A Corset card is still probably its best threat until the box comes out. You have to import threats like Sir Randall Tarley into the deck. The fact that it doesn't have these means, and it doesn't have a good economy, means it has to run trade routes and can't make up for the power differential with utility plots, with control plots, with tempo plots. You're running 2 trade routes because your economy is so crap. And that's good that you can do that and allows this deck to remain competitive, but it's also bad because this is not the second one. Trade routes is great. The second trade routes, you've got to do it because you need to be able the ability to play a trade routes early and play a trade routes late. This is very similar to the way in which a lot of Tyrell Mace decks played previously. And then of course you win or you die gives you that additional oomph to put the pressure on, particularly if you're capable of going for that turn 5 win, or not turn 5 win, excuse me, that turn 3 win. So that is where it sits. There's a couple other things I guess I should probably talk about here. The 2 utility characters, 3 I guess. So there's the Vanguard Lancer that can slow down an opponent's rush plan, and then it also has Littlefinger to provide an additional intrigue icon and additional economy and to draw cards. And then, of course, Maester Crescent, who gives you answer to powerful condition attachments like Frozen Solid and, of course, your opponent's Milks. So all in all, I do believe that this is the best Bara deck that's out there right now. I think it's the most consistent. I think if you really want to play yellow cards, this is where you've got to go. I think it's a really tightly built deck, like a lot of Hano decks. I think its synergies are really clear, really fun, really obvious. And not obvious in the everyone can figure it out, but obvious in the sense of like everything links together in a really powerful way. And if you've ever seen this deck moving through a game, doing its game plan, it can feel pretty unstoppable once it gets going. So what is this good against? Or at least solid against? I think it's solid against. It's solid against Greyjoy. I think it has a lot of play against Greyjoy. I think it has solid play against a variety of rush decks because it has the beef to keep up with what rush decks are trying to do, and while also executing its own game plan. That's where the stand can come in, allowing you to defend what your opponent is throwing at you, and then push back. Or going first with Robert to kneel out their key people. 2 Intimidates can generally just shut down a rush deck. Vanguard Lancer can slow them down. A lot of these things, Bastard Knights on triggers on the defense. So there's a variety of things that it's good against. I think if you bring back in the Seized by the Guards, you can have a solid matchup versus wall decks. Like the ability to keep a seized on, if you get the seized Isle of Ravens interaction going, the ability to constantly keep that going on the wall is really powerful. I think this deck struggles a little bit against Targaryen, which may seem a little weird because it has tons of strength pumps, but there's a lot of useful cards that are very vulnerable to Targaryen. There's a Green Apple Knight that Danny can snipe. A good Targ player knows how to snipe them. I think that we've also got Sir Justin Massey is Drac bait if there ever was any. Same with John Fossaway. You've got the Reducers, the Vanguards, a lot of sort of the lower tier, a lot of the Claim Soak, Courtiers, Faithful, Hedge Knights, these Vanguard Lancers. These are all really vulnerable to the things that Targ wants to do. And a Bara Rose Qohor that can easily be blown out by Blood of the Dragon. I think you have tools to beat that matchup. I think Arbor Queen and the attachment package is strong. Milk the Poppy is very good, but as a deck that relies on challenges, as Targ seems to be moving in the direction of just like burn, you're in trouble. I think that Stark C could probably give this deck a run for its money, and because it can stumble if it doesn't get set up properly. Because again, you don't really have a good turn 2 play if you stumble. You've got Peace and Prosperity, and then maybe you can go into King of the North if you have Robert, or if you don't have Robert. But that's turning off a huge part of your location package if you don't have Robert. An early trade routes for like 5 gold is not really going to get it for you. So there's like lots of room for error, and that's probably the biggest drawback of this deck. I think that the character base and the attachment base is very solid, and the attachment base is very customizable. But the location base and the fact that its economy is kind of garbagey is a problem for the deck, and it's going to cause it to stumble. I think in many ways this deck is its own worst enemy. Uh, it's not obviously an invincible deck. I think it's, again, got a bad Targ matchup. I think it will struggle against a Stark player that knows what they're doing against it. Mira is a really powerful card that can really shut them down. Taking away their saves with Arya, like a deck like Rat Cook, it would be really strong against this deck. The ability to sort of grind them out. I think the deck probably struggles against Martell, but it probably has more. If you bring the C's back in, that gives you some counterplay against Martell. So, about half of the factions that this has probably got a plus matchup versus, about half of the factions that you don't. And the attachment package you can customize to help you with that, but you can't overcome the deck's economy problems. That, I think, is its biggest drawback, and why I think it's still, while this is a really solid deck, it remains a tier 2 strategy. Solid, acceptable, respectable to bring, but not something that is going to guarantee you a spot in the cut, and probably is not a very good cut deck. It's a very solid Swiss deck, but not necessarily a good cut deck. Now, this deck goes, Hano's version that I'm showing you here is old. I don't think you need to change anything in the character base to update it. I could be missing a couple of good Baratheon cards, or maybe a Tyrell card, a Tyrell Knight or something. But I think that the character list is pretty good. I think the attachments can be customized however you want it. The question is, you want to find room, I think, for the River Gates. So the question is whether or not you go down on fiefdoms, you do something with the Rose Gardens, but that of course lowers your ability. So I think you would want to maybe find a spot for the new Bara economy. I think one of these honey wines becomes a Stony Sept to give you redundancy and give the deck access to an additional answer card. So and the ability, if you keep the Stormland fiefdoms in, to put the power, you move the power from Stony Sept to one of their characters, blank that character, trigger fiefdoms, put that on their faction card, giving you the steal, which also can speed the deck up, because if you're really punishing your opponent, you're going to be able to have power to steal with your power challenges, because this deck is all in on power challenges, and that's kind of all. It's kind of a one-trick pony in that sense. Because it doesn't really have ways to leverage the military. And certainly, if you scroll down a little bit, look at its 6 native intrigue icons, so we could go up to 9 with the little birds. It's not going to really be able to leverage that challenge. So, and winning military challenges is great, but it doesn't really leverage doing that, and so you're basically all in on the power challenge. I think that basically brings us to the end of discussing Bara Rose Qohor and where Bara is in the meta. I think that, again, this is a very respectable deck. I think Hano did a fantastic job coming up with it. He's also got a really cool, Lannister Alliance deck with Baratheon that leverages Patchface and Tommen and Sir Pounce, and does some really cool stuff. But that deck's a little bit more fringy than in this. This, for those of you who have played in the War format, I think basically since Hano won a regional with a version of this last summer, I think you've definitely run into this. I've played against it at Worlds, which I lost. I played against it at Jesse's Name Day and won. And I know that Team Bara at ThronesWAR fielded several of these. So it's a powerful Bara deck. And if you are interested in playing Baratheon, this is definitely where I would go. And I definitely do think it's a deck that, while if you're building other decks, you need to be prepared for. Because there is definitely opportunities, particularly if Greyjoy is running things over, particularly if Rush becomes really powerful. I think that this deck has a sort of a single weekend opening for you to come in and can steal a tournament. and I do think, as Hano's success winning a regional and finishing 5-3 at Stalik with this deck, a highly skilled player, this deck, because it's a Qohor deck, gives you a lot of opportunities to outplay people. So hopefully y'all enjoyed this long promised discussion of Baratheon. And what I think is where Baratheon is in the meta, where Baratheon, the best Baratheon deck right now. I don't know what's in the Bara box. Besides what FFG has spoiled, I'm excited. Hopefully, maybe we will see a cool Rolor Neil deck emerge. Definitely try and maybe punish some of these mid-range decks that like Greyjoy. We have a dream. We have a dream. That's floating around, or maybe Stark, but Stark has a lot of stand, so we'll see. The Bear Box is definitely going to change things, but according to the current article, it's not coming out until 2013. Oh my God, quarter 2009, quarter three 2019. So until then, this has been the newest How in the Why of It video. Please leave a comment, like, subscribe, do all that cool YouTube stuff. I'll be back probably maybe in a week or two with another one of these videos, probably another deck tech. We'll see. Maybe I'll talk about the deck that wins trial if it gets published. If you have any suggestions, or if you win with an event and you would like me to highlight your deck, please leave a comment here, leave a comment in the Facebook group, or send me a message. I'd be glad to do a deck tech about that. And again, if you have any suggestions, please feel free to leave them below. But until then, take care and enjoy.